Alright, welcome to the grand finale of our in-depth Go Down Moses series. This is the first time we're doing this format with the idea of let's go really deep into this book and pull out as much meaning as we can. As you guys know with Faulkner, there's a lot of different interpretations. This isn't going to be a complete every theory out there type video. Please feel free to offer up your interpretations in the comments below, and it's okay if we disagree, and it's okay for you to make comments or clarifications. These aren't totally scripted, so I do appreciate you guys holding me honest and accountable to make sure that we do get the most accurate answer out there for people. Now, I will do a little wrap up at the end here, but let's do chapters 6 and 7 of Go Down Moses and wrap this bad boy up. So Ike has received Sam's knowledge of the forest. We talked about that being one of the ways that things are passed down. Now we see Ike passing on Sam's information, his knowledge, to the next generation, or at least trying to. He's a little bit slower, and I would say the next generation a little bit more aloof is one way to describe it. Callous is another way. I'm not sure if there's one word to describe the next generation is exhibiting here, but it ain't good. We start to get the sense that Ike is not going to change the world. In the same way that laws have passed that have made African Americans American citizens, we start to see that they're still not being treated well, and they're not given the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness rights that all American citizens ought to have. If you haven't started with the Before Go Down Moses video, I don't know how you ended up here. You're one of those people that might start reading a series on book 4 or 5. I don't get you people. Go to Before Go Down Moses at least before here, because we do talk a little bit more about some of the racial themes in this book and some of what Faulkner was going through. Let's dive into this text in chapter 6 and start to talk about what's happening in this text. I think Ike is 73. He's between 70 and 80. We know that, but I believe 73 if I've done the math correct, but Faulkner is not consistent with time. And we see him driving out to the wilderness just like the good old days, but not in the old wagon going a couple miles out of town. We are going 200 miles out of the way in a fast-driving vehicle on a highway as modernization has taken over Jefferson, Mississippi area, Yoknapatawpha County. Now, this story takes place in 1940, the same year that Faulkner was writing this. World War II is going on. Things look very bleak. Things are scarce, and Faulkner, seeing all the racism still happening in the South, has the most negative outlook and bleak view on the future of America at this point in time, maybe even the world. We've come so far, but have we reached equality? That's what Faulkner's kind of talking about in this piece. So Ike heads out to the wilderness once again with his nephew Roth and Roth's friend Will Legate to go on their annual hunting trip. They drive in their fancy new car, and we reminisce about the good old days, and Roth is driving and suddenly hits the brakes. Why? We're not sure just yet, but we will find out later in the tent with an envelope. But we have this quote about Ike and passing on the knowledge in the car with 2 of the sons of his old companions, whom he had taught not only how to distinguish between the prints left by a buck or a doe, but between the sound they made in moving. So this kind of conveys that Ike is training these. These are the people that he's supposed to be passing his knowledge on to. So when they hit the brakes, we have this quote from Legate. Of course, an old man like Uncle Ike can't be interested in no doe. Not one that walks on 2 legs, when she's standing up, that is. Pretty light-colored, too. The one he was after them nights last fall when he said he was coon hunting, Uncle Ike. This is a really important line, with the light-skinned doe kind of representing the mixed racial offspring, and he even specifically calls out coon hunting, which is a very bad racial slur if you didn't know. He's hitting Ike on the head, and I think critics are very quick to point out that he's slow to pick up on this. I agree he's slow to pick up later on in the tent. I don't know if I agree that he is slow to pick up on this doe reference here. Well, they keep talking about hunting, and they keep talking about shooting does and stuff like that, and we're supposed to believe that Ike doesn't follow the metaphor that's happening here. Later on in the story, I'm going to time jump around a little bit, much like Faulkner himself, but we have this quote, because there was something running in Sam Father's veins, which ran in the veins of the buck too. So if it wasn't obvious before, as you know, Sam Fathers does have some black heritage in him. I think they are comparing that black heritage line and calling the buck. It's very clear that the bucks are meant to be representing of the black and mixed racial cultures at this point in time. But they move on to talk about World War II very shortly after here, right? And if you remember, of course, World War II was partially, I don't want to say started because of the racial heritage issues. I would prefer to say that Hitler scapegoated that as an excuse to galvanize the people, to give it a focused effort. I'll leave it to historians to debate that. But you have racial lineage being brought into this picture with why World War II is going on and what Faulkner's viewing in a very pessimistic manner right now. But Ike immediately says The only fighting anywhere that ever had anything of God's blessing on it has been when men fought to protect does and fawns. Immediately bringing up does and fawns to represent mankind. I think he gets that when they were talking about a doe being light-skinned, walking on 2 feet, I think he gets that they were talking about people, whether they were talking about the racial side of things. I don't know that side of things. The next few sections start talking as they go 200 miles deeper into the woods. I should say to get to the woods, as opposed to how it used to be much closer before. If you didn't know, this part is actually very biographical too, where Faulkner did go out into the woods and he did suffer an attack when he was out in the woods. And he did go very far, very, very, very far away into a delta area where this happened. So what's happened to Ike at this point in time? He had a life-changing moment where he decided to repudiate his heritage. He gave up the land. He gave up the money. This was one of the southern views, which was to just repudiate the curse of the land, if you will. And if you refuse to accept it, does that really erase what racial issues were happening in the South? So did Ike's repudiation of the land stop racial discrimination? No. Did it stop the advancement of now how they're having to go so far to reach the wilderness? No. And Ike is starting to become jaded. He keeps saying that this is going to be his last trip. But I think what he's kind of saying is this is his last attempt at trying to change future generations. This is him wearing down. So at this point in time, we're thinking, you and I as a reader are thinking, oh, Ike must be a good guy. He must not be racist. There's no way if he's trying to change these people, to train them up, that he must not have any racial issues at all, right? We agree he ignored the sweat money. We agree he went to go try to earn the honest money, if you will. We have a very important quote. There are good men everywhere at all times. Most men are. Some are just unlucky because most men are a little better than their circumstances give them a chance to be. And I've known some that even the circumstances couldn't stop. Let's keep exploring this in the next few sections. So as the men are leaving, Roth Edmund comes over to Isaac's bed and hands him an envelope. He's like, give this to her, .. Tell them I said no. So it's going to be her, but he stops himself because he doesn't want to tell Ike about the light-skinned, 2-footed doe that he saw and slammed the brakes on earlier. And he walks away, and Ike's like, what's going on? What this is really conveying is Roth is being a coward. He's representing the southern view, I think, of walking away. I don't want to say not acknowledging, but trying to buy off your grief from the problem by giving money to the problem, hoping the money just makes the problem go away, as if that would completely repay the issue. So a woman walks into the tent with a small child. Ike learns that Roth fathered that child. And then he realizes that that woman is related to him and thusly related to Roth. There's a lot of irony in that comment when she said Uncle Ike, which he is Uncle Ike to half the country, but he is literally her uncle, I believe, if I have my lineage down. I'll put a link to the genealogy tree. Maybe if you guys are much smarter at that, then you'll be able to help correct me in the comments below. But she's an ancestor of the Carruthers McCaslin line, coming from Turl, who was the damn half-white McCaslin, if you guys remember from the first chapter. We have come full circle to the original sin of incest and the family line, creating this shadow family, giving them money like we saw in chapter 2 with Lucas, and walking away. Now Roth is doing the exact same thing of incestuously creating a child, trying to give her money and hope the problem goes away. One of the ways that I think Faulkner viewed white Southerners dealing with grief is to pay money off to make the grief go away. But this uncovers a couple things too because of what Uncle Ike said. We thought Ike was the good guy. Just because you're a good guy and you fight for the right thing doesn't mean you can't also maybe be a little bit racist yourself. I don't know if this is something that Faulkner himself suffered for. We talked through a little bit in chapters 2 and 3 about the white man's burden, which is by some people considered a form of racism. You can see that maybe everyone has various levels of racism in the South, and Faulkner's kind of exploring the different ways that they try to buy off that grief. But also to draw full circle back to chapter 1, that woman was hunting down Roth in the same way that Sofanziba hunted down Uncle Buck, which started Uncle Ike's whole familial line. These stories are more connected than I think people give it credit for, to be honest. And I feel like this actually could have maybe even been the ending of the book without the last section. So now we have Ike coming back to try to give her the horn after being incredibly rude and racist. She says, "Old man," she said, "have you lived so long and forgotten so much that you don't remember anything you ever knew or felt or even heard about love?" So again, Ike's trying to buy her off in the same way that he just got done condemning Roth for as well. She's showing the human side of love and saying, I came here for love, not for the money. And that's what Roth and Ike are representing. Fixation on trying to buy or ignore problems. Because Ike goes on to say that he should just marry one of her own and move on, acknowledging further that racism exists even within himself. It's like the Southern spirit hasn't truly accepted the other race yet into American citizenship on equality. And it was pervasive at the time. So kind of stunned at this, Ike thinks Chinese and African and Aryan and Jew all breed and spawn together until no man has time to say which one is which, nor cares. And later he says, no wonder the ruined woods I used to know don't cry for retribution, he thought. The people who have destroyed it will accomplish its revenge. So here we have Ike talking about the revenge of slavery is coming and it's going to destroy the land. I would love to know what your guys' thoughts were on this section. I think this was a very powerful and interesting way to approach the white man grief, or lack thereof grief. The way to not truly acknowledge it, I think, is what Faulkner was going for. But again, he's seeing it happen over in Germany now. He's seeing it happen in his homeland. You can understand how this can keep a guy down, even if he suffers from it himself. So soon, another really important part is Legate returns to the tent, and they kind of basically allude to the fact that they just killed a doe, which, if you didn't know, again, another very biographical moment where, I think it was either 39 or 40, and Faulkner was out hunting. They weren't allowed to shoot does. 3 doe went flying by. He stopped his people from killing the doe. Later on that day, I believe he found out that other hunters had killed that exact same group of doe. So much like Ike, who attempted to repudiate the land, this land is cursed. I can't accept this inheritance. So if I don't accept it, that solves it, right? But then we have Roth coming up, recommitting the sins of the Carruthers line, attempting to just buy off the grief or buy off the problem. He didn't, by not committing the sin himself, that didn't stop the sin from being committed later on, in the same way that when Faulkner didn't shoot those 3 does, it didn't save their lives when later on other hunters killed those does. So let's wrap up this part 6. Did abolition and the freedom of African Americans as American citizens solve everything? No. There were still racial inequalities. There were still issues ingrained into Southerners at this point in time that they themselves have to figure out how to face and address, and not just buy off, ignore, or attempt to throw money at it and expect it to go away. You see Roth kind of representing that with him breaking the laws with shooting the doe. You have him committing the same sins. Ike is running out of energy in the same way that Faulkner is running out of energy with seeing these sins and issues being committed over and over again. I like this section in the sense that it's depressing, not because it's depressing, but because it's real. I don't think you could have had a South overcoming the issue without being realistic here, which I think is what Faulkner was going for. So while on a personal level, I don't love this part, I do love how realistic it is. And I think it helps me understand a little bit more about maybe some issues that pervade into America's current day. Ike himself talked about how hundreds or thousands of years from now, we maybe, but not now can he recognize it. The pressures of the racism will push at them, make them shrink away in the same way that maybe the wilderness is shrinking. All right, so let's go into chapter 7, Go Down Moses, the finale of this book, and then we'll do a quick wrap up and talk about some interesting points that have been brought up in the comment sections as we've done this series. So we started the last chapter talking a little bit about unproductive grief that isn't actually helping address the racial issues in the South. We saw grief heavily explored in chapter 3, where we saw the assistant deputy very divided, couldn't understand what Ryder was going through. Well, now we have I think the only female side in this whole story. We have Molly, spelled differently, but it is Molly Beauchamp. But we're immediately thrust into prison where Samuel Worship Beauchamp, I believe is his name, is being interviewed by a census taker and is about to be killed, capital punishment. Elsewhere, Molly hires Gavin Stevens, the county attorney, to help find her son, Samuel, because she had a vision. She needs to get a hold of him. Gavin finds a Butch Beauchamp, who is Samuel, in jail about to be executed. We have him being thrown off the Roth farm for breaking into the commissary, I believe it was, kind of tying in a little bit more about that previous section and maybe a little bit a different view of Roth than we got in the previous section. So Gavin heads to the newspaper, and that's where he sees the article about how he killed a Chicago policewoman. He calls in a white woman named Mrs. Worsham, using almost the same name as Samuel Worsham Beauchamp. I don't know why Faulkner loves to mess with the reader and the names, but he does it. But she was raised with Molly, and she agrees to help and gives him $25 to help for funds to bring Samuel's body back to have a funeral service for Molly, which is not enough money at this point in time. So what Mr. Gavin Stevens does is he goes around to the white families around town collecting money to help raise funds and have the services done. This is very symbolic, I think, of also the white man's grief of paying off the issue, trying to bury it in a sense. Because you got to remember, this is a convicted black man that people are putting money on to have proper services done in Mississippi, nonetheless. So we have Molly going through a lot of grief, and she is blaming the white man for the problems with kicking him off the farm. And you see Gavin not really understanding some of the grief, much like chapter 3 with the assistant deputy. You see it being committed again. We have Molly lamenting, Gavin not understanding, and we finish with the white point of view, with him not understanding what to do with the body. Molly wanted to show to the world, she kept mentioning, her son Benjamin being sold into slavery. She wanted to show the world what the Pharaoh, the white man, did to her children. We have the white man covering it up and wanting to get back to work, I believe was the last line. Again, not fully expressing or understanding the grief or the other point of view is what they're going for here. Which I'm glad he stuck with the white side here, because I think if he tried to explore this grief through Molly, I think we might have had a little bit more of the white man burden syndrome here, which I think I'm glad he didn't. A little bit of redemption for that. I think a lot of people might have questions about the name of the section being Go Down Moses. If you didn't see our Go Down Moses video, again, please go into that. But there's an interesting part here about Benjamin being sold to the Pharaoh, when everybody knows Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, right? Joseph was the one that was sold to the Pharaoh. So what was meant here, and I think a lot of people have different opinions. I'm going to go with actually the non-answer that I think actually Faulkner just screwed up. That I actually do have a quote where he was being interviewed and he said, well, what Bible are you looking at? And when the woman pressed further, he once again made another joke. I think deflecting the fact that he maybe made a mistake here. I don't know. If you guys had a clear takeaway, I would love to hear what your comments are down below, but that is a controversial section. I'm falling on the lines of I think it was a mistake and he used the wrong name here for when he was trying to make a biblical reference. So this section dealt a lot with the reparations from the white man's perspective, whether they pay it off, whether they ignore it, whether they repudiate the issues of the time. With this funeral representing the idea of burying the issues of slavery, I think it was. I think it's a difficult section and hard to talk about, but at the same time, several critics will talk about the emancipation of the slaves is another way of looking at the white man emancipating their own grief. That even if you did the right thing doesn't mean that you didn't also still have issues that you needed to work through, much like we saw in these two sections. Wow. So that was a real uplifting ending compared to the beginning, right? We had a lot of fun doing this. Like I've said, this is one of my favorite pieces. You don't have to twist my arm to read Go Down Moses. I probably read this every so often, and I'll probably revisit it again, but I don't think we'll ever do an in-depth section like this again. Maybe in the future I will have some updates to some further clarifications, because every time you read Faulkner, you learn more stuff. There's a very famous quote, no one reads Faulkner, you only reread Faulkner, and I find that very, very, very true. I want to call out a couple of comments that we've had from some wonderful subscribers. Starscream Live has made a wonderful comment where he talked about some of these issues are explored probably better, deeper in Absalom, The Sound and the Fury. But there's something about the characters, about Lucas Beauchamp and Molly, about Uncle Buck and Buddy, that this is a very character-driven channel. This is a very literary fiction-driven channel. I think maybe partly why this book is so important to me is, one, it did help me understand more about a past and issues in today's age and where it kind of stemmed from, but also the characters are just so memorable, which is I think why this one resonates with me so much more. We're going to redo Absalom. We'll have to redo for me for Absalom and the Sound and the Fury. I want to get closer to those and give them a better shot, because everyone talks about them, that maybe going through them again, that reread theory, that's going to help me get closer to those pieces and unlock more. Stay tuned for that. We are doing both of those this summer, so we hope you guys can stick around to enjoy that. I don't know if we'll do this in-depth section like the way we did there, but that is part of my goals, is maybe I'll read it one time or two times before, And then when we do the reread session for this channel, it's like a third or fourth time reading it for me. With that said, another comment I want to bring out is Brian from Bookish. He said disagree, but I don't know if we disagree on this. He had a really good point that, well, we talked about it in the first section and then in chapter 2, which came out later. Chapter 1, I feel like we do need to talk about some word choice that I had. I think it's important for everyone to kind of know this. He said it's important not to just say, he didn't say this exactly, but he said it's important not to just use the words they were thought of as property. And you see that all over in terms of CNN articles, in terms of books. Like, this is a common thing to throw out as they were thought of as property, because you get it. You're like, oh, okay, they weren't allowed to own things. They weren't allowed to vote or do things. They had to work how their masters told them to. But there's a big issue with propagating the usage of these words. The best way I can describe this is the Nuremberg trials, which we are going to go into later on this year, is do a little bit more of a deeper dive into World War II after some more of the Absalom and the Sound of the Fury readings. But you'll hear in the trials, I was just doing my job. This is the paraphrased answer of, I'm not responsible for killing millions and millions of human beings just because they were Jewish. I was told I had to kill Jewish individuals. And that's an issue. That is a self-defense mechanism. You knew you were killing people. In the same way, no, you knew they were human beings. You use them to achieve something in terms of farming or washing. You used another human being because other people allowed you to do it. It's a defense mechanism used by the South to kind of separate acknowledgement of that grief, which we covered it in depth in this section. So I don't think we disagree. I think what we need to clarify is stop probably using that term, because as Brian pointed out in that quote, or in his comment, how we did share our religion with them, I should say. We did allow them to raise our kids, we forced them to raise our kids. We knew they were human beings. So let's accept that, and the sooner that we can get to these racial issues, the sooner we can get closer to recognizing true equality with people. I think that's something that I'm very passionate about, and something that is something that's really important to exploring on this channel, because if you just read fiction for fun, you are missing out on so much of the story behind this piece. And I think that's what Go Down Moses really brings out for readers, is to get closer to understanding why we have such a big racial issue here still today in America, and some things that we need to do to start talking about to address it. And the first thing is acknowledging it and using more accurate words. So thank you guys for anyone that's commented on these videos up to now. I appreciate it. I never have an issue with people having a different view. I don't think having a different view makes another view wrong. I don't think having a clarification of view makes maybe intention wrong. I think this is a safe place for us to have a nitpicky conversation, I think, as Brian said it. I encourage that, and that's why we exist, and that's why we started this channel, was to get closer to the truth. So guys, thank you so much for checking out our in-depth series. I really hope you appreciate it. I really hope that you subscribe and consider sticking around some more Faulkner videos, and as we go further into World War II and the Nuremberg trials later on this year. We appreciate your guys' time. We appreciate your guys' respect. We appreciate everything that you guys do for us, and we hope that we can give back the best that we can and keep a conversation going about important issues in our time. So with that, guys, please consider subscribing. Over here, subscribing if you haven't already. Una out.